So let's start here with Van Halen. The album is 1984. Rumor has it this was a gift you received as a teenager. Can you share that
It's a
story
rumor
that
you
gets us
heard from
started?
me.
Yes, I hear rumors. I need to fact check. Yeah.
So I would have been, it's when it came out. So I would have been in grade 2 or 3, something like that. And I was playing basketball out in my front yard in Markham on my driveway. And my friend at the time, I can't remember his last name. I remember his first name was Dave. These are the Daves I know. And he showed up on his bicycle. He had one of those, it looked like a motorbike, but it was just a bicycle. Do you remember those? They have great big shocks and big seats. And he showed up on that with a wrapped album. And that album was Van Halen 1984. It came out in 1983. And so I got it for my birthday in April of 1983 and unwrapped it and was instantly struck by the album cover, which is amazing, which is that painting of a little boy with angel wings smoking a cigarette, right? Um, and then the band on the back looks really cool. You pull out the insert, and what I remember from the insert is the insert picture is actually put in upside down, and they're all sweaty and look weird when you pull it out that way. But also, then you take it in the house and stick it on your record player in your bedroom. Um, Prior to this album, all hard rock was guitars, right? You'd get some keys on a lot of 70s records and things like that, but not heavy synthesizers, right? And the very first track on that is 1980, the tune 1984. And back in that era, 1984 was something we were all leading up to. It was sort of like 2000, like the year 2000, 1984 was the future is coming. Um, Maybe because of George Orwell's book, who knows? Um, but you put on the and that maybe from that Van Halen record because you put the needle on that very first tune and it's just all synth. I'm
It's
not
just
sure
a
if it
1 minute intro, right?
of just this futuristic sounding space music, right? And I remember calling my brothers into the room. I have two brothers going, listen to this. This is the future.
Future
Um,
man.
yeah, and then it kicks into Jump and then goes into Panama. And it's just such a perfectly laid out record as well. Side B, you flip it over, and the very first track is Hot for Teacher. Um, and so you put the needle down on that and you get that insane drum intro. But then the other thing that makes this record especially cool, I think, um, and like all Van Halen records, they're when you're a Van Halen fan like myself or any hardcore Van, all of the songs are hits. Every single song is a hit. You listen to the whole record. There's not like they have their singles, but really, all of them. And Van Halen's aware of that. I know that because when you go see them play, they'll start with songs like Romeo Delight that were never singles, but the crowd goes insane, including me crying and making eye contact with Eddie as he's playing it. And the cool thing about the ends of 1984 on both of those is they put mean sounding songs as the last tracks. So
The
Van
heavier
Halen,
stuff.
yeah, Van Halen records, people might say they like Women and Children first, that record, because it's a lot heavier and mean sounding. And same with Fair Warning is a very mean sounding record. But also these records have these goofy, like swing songs or like disco tunes on them or like really strange oddball stuff, which is part of the reason I begged these guys to put an acoustic country song that we recorded on their record because I said, if Van Halen can do it, you can do it. And you know what? They didn't put it on the record. So the Standstill is, in my mind, the very best song they wrote for the isn't on the record. Who knows what's going on with it, but it's
It's never
totally
been released. Like you can't find it
never
on
been released. So
Spotify
bug
or
them about it because it is awesome. I'll spill the beans on part of it because whatever. Renee sings on it. Bum bum
ooh.
bum. It's
Now, okay, I'm intrigued with this.
and she is so good. She's the way she looks, her sort of rock attitude, it all comes out in her voice. But anyways, Van Halen records are full of that stuff. I think the 1984 record is like an all-encompassing Van Halen record where it's full of all this sort of party rock, but everybody gets featured on the album, and then it's that introduction of all the synth stuff, and it's just so awesome and so good. And for me, it was my real introduction to Van Halen was listening to that record. I have a dear friend that we debate about Sammy and David Lee Roth all the time. Um, Johnny Fiasco movie guy is what we call him. But he talks about when the first album, he can remember the day the very first Van Halen record came out. And if you get guests that are maybe a couple years older than me, that's their memory of Van Halen. So I don't know if they would ever say 1984 is their best record because they all have these memories of showing up to high school and everybody is playing Eruption in their car, full blast, like everywhere you went. But for me, that moment was definitely 1984, hearing those futuristic synths, and then jumping straight into Jump, and then all of the drum solos. And it's just such a beautiful record. And it's too short. It's really, really short.
Yeah,
You know,
it's there's 9 songs, but we mentioned the first song is a 1 minute intro. So there's really 8 songs, and 4 of them were legit massive radio hits. So Jump, I'll Wait, Panama, and Hot for Teacher. You mentioned those already. I did a past episode, my 5 favorite albums, with the original drummer from Stain, John Wysocki, and he chose the first Van Halen album, like you said. So I did a deep dive on that, and he was talking about Eruption came out, and people didn't know if a human actually played that, if that was studio wizardry, was it like a robot, and it just changed guitar, right? The
it's
two-hand
just the
tapping.
guy.
Yeah,
Yeah, just his hands. Yeah. So he's probably a couple of years older than me then
probably. Yeah.
to have a memory like that. Yeah, because that was very life changing for a lot of people. So
You kind of have a bookend of the two. So that was the first studio album from them, and this is the 6th. And the last one until they did another album in like 2012. This is the last one with David Lee Roth, and then there's the Sammy
yep.
Hagar years. And the first one we're talking about and this one both went diamond in the US. So it's Van Halen is only one of 6 bands, period, in human history to have not one but 2 diamond albums. It's like impossible for a band to have one, and they have
I
2.
thought
So
5150 was their biggest selling record.
no, so it was either the debut or this one.
Oh, interesting.
They both
Okay.
went diamond, and then globally it's normally double that. So I would say each of those probably sold 15 to 20 million total globally. So
And then they're really sad showing with the singer from Extreme. They made that one record and sold 300,000 copies or something.
which is good for other bands, but not for them.
Oh,
But
it was pitiful for them. Yeah, yeah.
that's funny. Let's jump into a few of the songs specifically. So let's just dive into the first single, "Jump." So that's the lead single, and even to today, that's the band's first and only #1 single on the Billboard Top 100, which is crazy. You think of how many albums they've sold and how much success, but most of the other songs are rock, like they're pretty heavy, so it's hard to cross over to just mainstream top 100 to be a #1 hit. But you mentioned Jump had that synth, which kind of opened up a new market and had a little bit more pop element to it.
Well, yeah. Well, Van Halen always swings, right? And David Lee Roth talks about that, how he's more of a disco dancer and singer, and sort of you put the swing that that band does in line with the guy that loves to dance and party like him, and it's just going to gravitate to so many people, and then will likely be timeless. I think Eddie Van Halen says that Jump is his favorite Van Halen song just because it had the most success as well. And it's still so awesome and fun to play, and there's so much fun stuff to listen to in that song, even production wise. Anybody goes back to that, pay attention to the snare drums and the kick drums in the song because the production is really interesting. Whereas I can't off the top of my head without listening to it, there's something bizarre about it where there's like no kick drum in the verses and then it's really loud in the choruses. It might be the snare drum, but there's some really interesting production stuff in that song as well. But yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I think
really
there's
cool.
there's some production stuff on the album where instead of actual bass, they have like a synth bass. Like there's little things that are
Yep.
different on
Oh
there.
yeah, because I was watching a thing recently where Michael Anthony is playing the bass line to jump. He's playing the other part, but he's doing it on a keyboard, which I was surprised about. I didn't know that he did that. So yeah, it's really cool. Yeah, they were sort of integrating keyboards for the first time, and then I guess the record after that they really laid on it, like 5150. They really leaned into it.
So that would be the first Sammy Hagar record then?
That's the first one with Sammy, right? Whereas you go to the other one that's on your list, which we'll talk about at the end, I think, which David Lee Roth came out with after that, which is the opposite direction. It's just full on guitar, bass, drum record, right?
So I was checking out the lyrics and the subject matter for Jump, and it's it's like a positive, uplifting song. Like, hey, you have one life, you might as well jump. Like, just jump into it. And David Lee Roth says that the original idea and the lyrics was he saw this. He was watching TV, and on the news there was footage of a guy that was kind of waffling about committing suicide and jumping out of a building. So you just see this guy not quite sure if he's going to jump or not. And it just made him think that like the people that were actually there in person watching this guy, he thought maybe someone would probably want to be yelling out like, hey man, you might as well just jump. And so he had that line. So he mentioned to the producer and to the band, I have this idea, and they love kind of the hook line, but they didn't like that it would be a song about suicide.
yeah, you
So
might as well kill yourself.
yeah,
Yeah.
so they kept the line of hey, you might as well jump, but they switched it from suicide to like an uplifting anthem.
Jump into life.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny because the theme is exact. The Salads did a cover of Kiss's song "Lick It Up," which is around the same time, I think, and was changing for them. But it's exactly the same theme. When we recorded it, I was really taken aback by the lyrics and "Lick It Up" because I became a massive fan because I was like, this is so amazing. These lyrics are amazing. Because what does Paul Stanley say? There is no crime in being good to yourself. Now lick it up. All right. Like, because as a kid, I always heard it as they're perverts. I was thinking about Gene Simmons' tongue, lick it up. And now I realize, oh, he's actually saying live it up. All right. Like, and that's exactly what jump is. Right. Like jump into life, lick up life. Right.
So I have a few accolades for that song, and then we'll move on to a different one. So Rolling Stone has Jump at number 177 on its list of 500 greatest songs of all time. Jump was ranked number 15 on VH1's 100 greatest songs of the 80s. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and Museum has it as one of the 500 songs that shaped rock and roll. Jump was nominated for a Grammy Award. And one thing that's cool, we're talking about David Lee Roth and Sammy Hagar. This is one of the only songs that Sammy would sing when he was a part of the band. So he loved the song enough that he would sing it despite it being a different singer.
Well, you got to play that song.
Apparently he didn't sing the other hits. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I've seen him sing a lot of good stuff, but it'll be interesting to see what they do with Joe Satriani. I'm a huge Joe Satriani fan, but I'm in tune with most other people out there. I wish they had. I know they're doing it because they're all buddies, and Joe is part of Chickenfoot and stuff like that. But if you're going to go out and celebrate Van Halen, get a guy like Phil X, or get a guy like
Wait,
Nuno.
are you saying that Van Halen is going to be touring again, but with different musicians? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
See, I wasn't in the loop. So what's the deal? What's going on?
They're doing a Van Halen sort of tribute. That's Sammy Hagar. This just came out like a week ago. That's Sammy Hagar and Michael Anthony. And they asked Alex Van Halen to do it, and Alex said no. So John Bonham is doing it, or Jason Bonham is doing it, and then and they got Joe Satriani to play guitar for it. And then they went on the Howard Stern show. I think before Eddie had really, before Joe had really had a chance to sit down and learn a lot of these things. And then they were asking questions about some really unique things that Eddie does, and then Joe would try to do it. And for us in the guitar world that are huge Eddie fans, we're all like, what's happening? Why doesn't Joe know how to play this right? And even though Joe is like one of the greatest of all time and has built a better guitar career than almost anybody in history. I don't know if he's the right guy to play Eddie Van Halen tunes, right? Like there's a certain type of fire that a guy like Phil X has that's there, or these guys that have obsessed over it their entire life, like a Nuno Betancourt, that just kind of do it in a better way. But I'm sure it'll be fun. I'm sure it'll be fun. I would just rather have see someone that is an insanely huge Eddie fan go and do it, right? But
Yeah. Do you think you'll grab a ticket if it comes to town, or?
I'm such a purist, it's hard for me to say.
That's funny.
Yeah, like
You,
I didn't want to go see them with Wolfgang because I had so badly was, well, where's Michael Anthony? This isn't Van Halen. But then I did go and see them, and it was awesome.
I have a random Wolfgang story. So I just went to Montreal for the Metallica 2 night weekend for the recent tour. So it was Mammoth VH. So it was Mammoth VH opening, and then it was Pantera, and then it was Metallica. And I kept
Yep.
seeing this Mammoth VH everywhere. And I'm like, why is this band getting such a push? And they're on the biggest tours, and there's all this hype. And I'm watching, and it's like this incredible guitarist, all this stuff. I didn't know that Mammoth VH is for Van Halen, and it's Wolfgang Van Halen is it's his solo career is under that band name. I didn't know
Yep.
that till after I saw them. So I'm out of the loop.
Wow, that's wild. So you're just like, why is this guy so big?
Yeah, I was like,
Right.
why do the biggest bands in the world like Metallica take this random band on tour? Like, why is there all this hype? And then I watch, I'm like, this guy's like an incredible guitarist and singer. And then I find out the VH stands for Van Halen. I'm like, oh, I can't believe I didn't know this.
Oh yeah, yeah. And Eddie talked about him all the time. And you know, pay attention to him. He's so great, but he's doing his own thing. Really, really listen. And I think that big song that's about his dad. I don't know if you've seen there's a video for it too. It's such a beautiful tune. I can't remember what it's called. It's a Mammoth song that's all about Eddie. Um, that he apparently played it for Eddie when Eddie was in the hospital, and Eddie loves it, but never really caught on that it was about him and his dad and their relationship. And I think the lyric is no matter where I go, I know you're with me, sort of thing. And it's so beautiful. And that video is so hard to watch because it just shows them growing up together, and then Eddie going, I love you, buddy, to him, and just the connection they had on stage together. And yeah, they're living the dream. You know, I've always
That's a
thought
sweet
that Time
tribute.
of the Earth was like the Canadian Van Halen in a sense, where it's the two brothers, right? And then Jag is this great guitar player, this great shedding, unique guitar player. And then it's amazing because Jag's son Jackson is becoming an incredible musician as well. And so when I quit the band, I was like, I wonder who they're going to get. And I remember thinking, I wonder if they'll get Jackson to play bass, all right, just like Wolfgang and Van Halen.
Mm.
But I guess they weren't ready, and they got Joe Barlow, who was our guitar tech, and Joe's a great musician, and he started taking over the bass duties. But I'm hoping one day that I'll see Jackson doing it too. So
I have a couple random things about the song Panama that I thought were cool. So, despite the name, it's not about the country. Apparently, there's a car called the Panama Express that
oh,
David Lee Roth saw when he was in Las Vegas,
that makes
and
sense with the bridge of the song, right? I
with
ease the
the
seat back.
rumbling
Yeah,
car in there. Yeah.
yeah.
So they said that that's actually Eddie Van Halen's Lamborghini. They backed up to the front of the studio and they ran microphones out to the exhaust. So
Yep.
that's his Lamborghini.
No, I know. I've heard that story too. Yeah. Yeah. He
And to
always
keep
loved cool cars. Yeah.
and to keep going with the car, I thought this was actually really funny. So Roth wrote the song after being accused by a reporter of singing about only women, partying, and fast cars, and it made him realize he hadn't written a song about fast cars.
Yeah. I was going to
So
say there are no fast car songs. Yeah.
yeah, so then he wrote Panama so that he actually what they accused him of, it was actually true after he wrote that song.
Just in time before Sammy joined the band and they played I Can't Drive 55. Yeah.
Yeah. So apparently, so I mentioned this to you before the interview, that all these years I've heard that the song Jump was so influential because before Jump there was the weird like disco phase and dance phase, and so, and then suddenly there's Jump that bridges the gap of the danceable stuff with the synthesizer, but also the rock of, the hard rock of Van Halen. And it was like the perfect, like bite-sized middle between both that everyone was able to get into, that then led everything away from disco and back into rock. I've heard that is like the one, and it goes diamond, right? It's like as big as you can get. That is the turning point that shifted away from one genre into the genre after that. Um,
Oh, I
did
believe it. Yeah.
did you ever hear anything like that? I don't know where I heard this. It's just something that's been ingrained in me since I grew up hearing that it was a turning point in the music
Well,
industry.
I know for myself, even the way I described it when I put the needle on that record for the first time, the very first thing you hear are these futuristic synths, and it made my brain explode. And I had to call my brothers in the room, this is the future. And so right away, I had, like, from the very first couple seconds of listening, this is the future of music, was what I had in my mind. And so, yeah, for sure. And the thing, and I've said it already, but the sort of mix of genres like that is, I think, what makes them so timeless as well. And I don't know, there was, at that time there was a big movement of synthesizer music happening, but not with those amazing shredding guitars, right? And then everybody did it, right? You get like the Final Countdown and stuff like that. You can even say Honeymoon Suite because it's full of synthesizers, right? And then all of even the Kim Mitchell stuff all of a sudden filled up with synthesizers. And but that was a huge turning point because it's really dancey as well. Yeah, it's so good.
So apparently in the lead up to writing and recording this album, Eddie Van Halen was already playing around with synthesizers, and the producer Ted Templeton and David Lee Roth hated it, and it was 2 against 1, and I guess he felt dejected that they didn't want the synthesizer. And at that time he was building his own home studio, and it was going to be a while before it was operational. So he's just in the studio that's not operational with the synthesizer, and he was alone, and he just was playing around with it and ended up writing most of the stuff for this album, 1984. And because he was alone, there wasn't the other two guys telling him that you shouldn't be using the synthesizer. And by the time he presented the songs that were so fleshed out and undeniable, they got on board with it. So apparently
That's how you do it.
yeah, apparently it was him kind of just secluded that came up with this sound to the point where people could believe in it because he had fleshed it out so much.
I bet that was pretty intentional on his part, just because it's making me think of the moments with um, the Salads when we were making this record, the Big Picture record. There are things I wanted to hear on the record that I was having trouble getting people to agree to or to hear what I was hearing in my head. And um, I was the one guy in the band that didn't drink a lot at the time. We were living in London, recording with Dan Broadbeck at EMAX Studios. And so, what I would do to get these parts on the record, because I knew Dan would be there very early in the morning editing, is I would get up nice and early and get myself to the studio by myself and say, hey, I've got this idea. Can we just try it? And then we would do it and hash it out and get through the whole thing, um, record it all. And by the time the other guys show up, you're like, hey, check out this part. And so it's done. And then maybe it's just they've got an idea to add to it or expand on it, but it's no longer me fighting for that idea. I've already created it, and here it is. Right. And
That's
that's what
smart.
made me think of, I bet that's what Eddie was doing. He's like, I'm just going to do it. Screw these guys. Right. Yeah.
And everything worked out in the end.
It did.
I have two more things about this album, then we'll move on to the next one. I had mentioned before that the album went diamond. It's their second album to go diamond, but it actually, the album had legs because it went diamond 15 years after it was released. So in
Oh,
1999, it
wow.
finally went diamond. So it just showed that the popularity continued until 15 years later, it went diamond. And then one other thing I thought was cool is, despite the album being massive, 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 It never went to number one. It was stuck at number two. I think it was for 5 weeks. I'll double check.
Oh, I can't
Yes.
believe that didn't go to number one.
So
Wow.
it was stuck at number two for 5 weeks. And do you want to know why? Because the biggest album of all time was at
Was it
number
Michael
one.
Jackson?
Michael Jackson Thriller held it out for five
I was
weeks.
going to
So
say it was probably Michael Jackson was making that impossible. Yeah.
yeah, literally any other time in human history, it would have gone to number one, except it was out at the exact same time as the biggest album in human history that held it at number two.
Which Eddie Van Halen played guitar on too.
Yeah, he's on Beat It. So
Yep.
I guess technically he was number one and number two for a while.
Yep, he was.
That's so cool. And the last thing I want to ask you about that is I think you've seen Van Halen live.
Yeah, a couple times. Yeah.
In what renditions of the band? I'm just curious. I've never seen them, and I feel like the musicianship would be mind-blowing. I'm wondering what it was like at a Van Halen concert.
Well, I mentioned that I made eye contact and cried, right? So that was the coolest show. I've taken my son to see them, and we've had lawn seats and stuff like that. But there was a show they played in London, Ontario, um, that was general admission, which was so amazing. It was outdoors and it was general admission, and it was with David Lee Roth. It was when they were back out touring with Roth. Um, and my good friend Dennis gave me a ticket. I have an extra ticket. You want to come? And so I went along. And then when we got there, I'm not the type of person to push through a crowd to get to the front, but my good friend and one of Jerry Finn's best friends, and maybe the biggest Van Halen fan I know, he's got this unbelievable collection of backstage passes and even checks written to managers. He's got this, he could open a museum. Um, so Greg was standing up against the gates waiting for the show to start, standing right in front of where Eddie was going to come out. And he started texting me in just bold letters, front row, Van Halen, come here, regret forever, be here now, come, just push your way. And so with Dennis and myself, I said, you know what, I've got to go. Greg's right, we've got to do this. And we pushed our way through and had people yelling at us and getting mad, but we got our way right up to the very front, right out in front of Eddie. And it was right before the show started. And Greg turns to me and he goes, you ready? Here we go. Woo, woo, woo. Oh, and that's exactly how it started, was it just comes out with Eddie just making noises on his guitar. And they started with the tune Romeo Delight, that I believe is off of Diver Down. It's such a heavy, awesome tune. And Eddie started playing that, and Greg and Dennis and myself all standing in a row going crazy screaming. I have pictures of it somewhere. The three of us all started crying, like watching Eddie play this, and he's got this huge smile on his face. And then he looked over and he saw the three of us standing there like grown men all crying and laughing, and he winked and kept on sort of laughing and smiling the whole time. And it was awesome. It was great. He played awesome. To stand up that close and get a chance was amazing. One of my life goals, something I'd been trying to manifest my whole life, was to jam with Eddie Van Halen one day. And I do feel like I was getting closer. Unfortunately, he passed away. But so when I did this tour, actually, it was this tour because that's 2016. We actually, our guitar tech on the tour was Lonnie Topman, who was Eddie Van Halen's guitar tech. And so I was close enough in that sense where I'm sitting on a tour bus with one of Eddie's main people. And he's telling us all these great Eddie stories about working with Ed over the years. And then I found out that the road cases that we were using on that tour were also used to all belong to Eddie as well. And Eddie also gifted Jag a guitar, I found out, for the very first time of their Earth record that they made. He gave Jag one of the Eddie Van Halen signature guitars at the time. I think it was when he was with PV, but the Wolfgang guitars. Gave one to Jag and then called him one day. And Jag has told me that's one of his biggest regrets. I may have told you the story before, but Eddie called him one day, says, "Hey, is this Jag?" And yeah, this is Eddie. I just want to know how you like the guitar. Jag told me this story. I hope I remember this correctly, but he ran into the other room because it freaked him out so bad, and he hid behind a chair on the telephone and sat on the ground and was so nervous. And um, Eddie started asking him about the record and how's the guitar sound and things like that. And Jaggis told me his biggest regret was because he was so nervous that Eddie was asking to come and hang out in the studio and listen to the album and hear what they were working on. And Jag said no, because he was too nervous and he didn't feel like it was ready yet. And it's one of his biggest regrets. And so I got really close by playing with the I Mother Earth guys. I almost got there, where I was playing guitars with the guy who Eddie was calling, on the telephone. So and I think they invited him to I think Lonnie let Jag sit behind Eddie's cabinets when they did Canada Day at Molson Park up in Barrie one year as well, because I remember Jag telling me that story. So I feel like I got kind of close, but
Yeah, you were just one person away with both Jag and then with the guitar tech. So
oh, and he was the greatest guitar tech. He'd set my guitar up to play like I've never had it play before. It was excellent. What a great guitar tech. So